Good morning, and welcome to the Global Current. I'm executive producer Bill Golba, and I'll be your host on this special edition of the show as we take you behind the scenes of last week's ECOSOC Youth Forum, held at the UN last Monday and Tuesday. We'll hear from UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and ECOSOC President Martin Sajik, followed by analysis and interviews with youth representatives from around the world who participated in the conference. Finally, we'll talk with Jackson Dougan, the United States Youth Observer at the UN, on his insights and hopes on the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy the show. To start off our special coverage, Global Current Associate Producer Daniel Garay brings us the highlights of the addresses by UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and ECOSOC President Martin Sajik to the forum.
On February 2nd at the United Nations headquarters in New York, youth delegates and observers from around the world converged to discuss their role in the development of the post-2015 Sustainable Development Goals. The president of ECOSOC, Martin Sajik, opened the forum with his thoughts on the goals.
We cannot discuss the future development goals without bringing the voices of young people into the discussions to give them the opportunity to shape the future they want.
Secretary General Ban Ki-moon gave his thoughts on the forum.
2015 is not just another year. This may be one of many years. We have already lived 20,015 years, but we will have to go. But this is a very special year, a very crucial, we say a crucially important year. Ours is the first generation with the potential to end poverty. And we are the last generation to tackle climate change. We don't have any time to lose.
This is Daniel Garay from the Global Current.
Up next, Global Current correspondent Bjorn Schwarzenbach details the main focus of the ECOSOC Youth Forum, the creation of the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
This past week, youth from around the world attended the United Nations Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, Youth Forum in New York with the goal of engaging youth in the transition from the Millennium Development Goals, or MDGs, to the Sustainable Development Goals, commonly referred to as the SDGs. The two-day forum not only brought together youth, but also convened UN member states in order to foster a platform for youth to voice their opinions. In addition, official member state youth representatives to the UN, youth representatives of NGOs and their partnership networks, along with university students, attended the fourth annual forum. The original MDGs were 8 development goals that the international community put together in 2000 at the Millennium Summit. At the end of 2015, at least 4 of the goals will have been met. These include cutting extreme poverty by half, producing positive results in fighting diseases such as TB and malaria, sending more kids to primary school, and improving clean water access. 15 years after these global targets were set, world leaders will again meet later this year to finalize the SDGs. These new goals will serve as a more sustainable and comprehensive policy framework, with the original 8 MDGs at their core. This agenda is set to be finalized this September at a UN Special Summit on Sustainable Development and a climate change conference in December, thereby culminating years of busy negotiations and consultations between governments, international organizations, and civil society. These new development goals, which consist of 17 core goals and 169 related targets, have been taking shape in the past 3 years. They are intended to be inclusive and engaging the widest possible cross-section of the world's population. The UN, having recognized the importance of youth and youth policy, sought to focus on including youth in deciding any future development policy at this year's forum. The event featured 5 sessions on various issues, including a review of the 95 World Program of Action for Youth, Gender Equity, and African Youth. Working off of last year's ECOSOC Youth Forum and the resulting Global Youth Call on Youth Priorities and this year's forum, the UN system will continue to consult youth in finalizing the SDGs and specific country policy frameworks. Even before the General Assembly, or GA, meets in September, consultations and negotiations will also take place at meetings of the Commission on the Status of Women in March and the ECOSOC high-level segment in July. These eventually will be included in the Secretary General's report to the GA in September. The forum included not only panels of UN organizations, but also afforded youth representatives a forum to voice their input into the discussions. 2 points for discussions were brought up and heavily talked about throughout the entire forum. one being gender discrimination and equity, and the other the ongoing youth unemployment crisis. With youth from all corners of the world at the forum, participants were able to learn about the experiences of being a young person in a variety of different environments and situations. When talking about youth education and unemployment, the current global unemployment crisis was highlighted as a major challenge facing youth today, with recommended priorities being mentioned such as adequate education and investment, job training, and social protections for youth. We're living in an increasingly interconnected world, and our political leaders can no longer afford to ignore the needs and ideas of the world's youth. Youth participation in the creation of the SDGs reveals that UN leaders are becoming aware that when discussing the world we will inherit, our voices matter. This is Bjorn Schwarzenbach reporting for the Global Current.
Associate producer Diana Garay now delves into the empowerment and participation of youth in their respective governments.
One of the most controversial roles of youth in the modern world is their role in government. With the rise in democracies around the world, there is a general consensus that the people are the government, and that the government must be accountable to the people. However, as democracies around the world continue to evolve, even with a few bumps here and there, the youth at the ECOSOC Youth Forum believe that now is the time to become a significant weight in their respective governments. With the help of the United Nations Development Program, delegates and observers were welcome to express their ideas on youth keeping their governments accountable. In some governments around the world, access to information from the government is hard to come by, and in many places the youth do not have the right to participate. The goal of this small conference within the forum was to draft several goals to help the youth participate and make a difference in their respective states. Amongst those goals were access to information and the ability to engage in evidence-based advocacy. Before the conference, it was already known that technology had played a key role in jump-starting the role of youth in governments. With this in mind, the group had devised ideas that would help these goals come to fruition. Informing the youth with what is important to them is a great way to involve them in the national discussion. Finding their spark and their forte will easily mobilize the youth into fighting for what they believe in. The types of media in which they can be informed with the issues that they are interested in would be through social media. However, some do not have access to this kind of technology due to extreme poverty. In this regard, community programming is key, whether television or radio. Education is another important aspect in making government accountable to the youth. Educating the youth is usually something that is controlled by the government. For example, in the United States, there is only 1 year of civics taught in public school. In other, more authoritarian regimes, the students are taught to fear the government or leader, rather than the youth being able to participate and keep leaders accountable. Changes in education policy can be shaped to teach the youth about the government and system, to teach them to be good citizens, and how they can make their voices heard and respected by the government. After the youth is informed, what then? That is where change must come from the government. The youth must hold the government accountable. The youth must demand access to information, and most importantly, the right to participate in government. Taking a look at all aspects of government, no matter how democratic, most of the participants are quite old. To be frank, there are not that many young people that take a major role in the decisions of any government. However, in the last decade, there has been a surge in the amount of young politicians taking office. For example, the Albanian parliament has half of its seats occupied by parliamentarians under the age of 40. With the change in some countries like Albania, many youth want to amend the constitutions to where the heads of state and parliamentarians can take office at a younger age. With politicians and members of the government being a part of the youth policy will be able to take root. And that would be the ultimate goal for the youth of the world, dictating their own future with their own policy. By the same token, the hope is that the government will not be against the people, but rather work for the people on an equal playing field where the two work together. International organizations like the World Bank, which hosts its own youth forum, certainly believe in the youth as the future, especially in regards to sustainability.
We're trying to put together a new initiative to basically bring youth from around the world, be it through students and academia, be it through CSOs, NGOs, young parliamentarians, to basically help us inform how we can react to the Sustainable Development Goals as they're being written, and then help support the global youth agenda in terms of our operations and knowledge.
Some believe that the UN is a platform for this to be possible. James Aniyamuzala, president of the African Youth with Disabilities Network, had this to say.
UN facilitates diversity, and the vulnerability is taken into consideration. But you take into consideration the needs of young people with disability, the needs of young people who are LGBTs, and the young people who are in Syria.
In regards to American youth, who enjoy the freest access to information and free speech, Andrew Rabins, the advisor on global youth issues at the State Department, believes that the situation for American youth is similar to those throughout the world.
Foreign youth leaders look to the United States and kind of the examples that have been set through the civil rights movement, the women's suffrage movement, current efforts around building youth power and activism. And I think Americans also often look overseas to find areas of potential innovation and opportunity that they can emulate as well. We have to embrace the fact that it takes some real commitment and action to make progress on things. And that, while it is important that we're active online, that it also will take an effort offline to mobilize people, to get out there, to fight for what you believe in, to take advantage of the opportunities to make your voice heard.
With the empowerment of youth through advocacy and the UN, the youth of the world can begin to take their own future into their own hands. This is Daniel Goodeye for the Global Current.
Managing editor of the Diplomatic Envoy and Global Current guest contributor Francesca Regalato discusses the role of youth in gender equality and the differences and similarities throughout the world.
The penultimate session of the ECOSOC Youth Forum immediately set itself apart from the others. Al Jazeera journalist Femi Oke moderated the panel on gender equality and youth. After opening remarks from panel chair Maria Emma Mejia Velez, vice president of ECOSOC and permanent representative of Colombia to the United Nations, Ms. Oke instructed the audience to applaud only when they like what the panelists are saying, not simply out of courtesy. "This looks like a panel. It's actually a rally," said Oke, who anchors the stream on Al Jazeera. "I want this rally to earn every bit of applause." The Beijing Platform for Action was the main topic of the panel's discussion. It has been 20 years since the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing, China, which resulted in an agenda for women's empowerment. Asked by Ms. Oke what changes he has seen in the past 20 years, Daxatal Wickramaratne, representing the Global Civil Society Advisory Group, said, "The topic of gender equality is less controversial." As the theme of the Youth Forum was transitioning from Millennium Development Goals, or MDGs, to Sustainable Development Goals, education spokesperson for Marami Africa, Vivian Anano, said, "If we don't achieve gender equality, forget about achieving Sustainable Development Goals." According to Ms. Anano, since MDGs were instituted, we have achieved some parity when it comes to girls' education in primary school, but not in high school or college. A major concern because the first two levels are invalid without the third. "I am the first girl in my community with a college degree," Ms. Anano said of her upbringing in rural Kenya. Before the audience could get a chance to applaud her achievement, Ms. Anano interjected that this is not something to be applauded in the 21st century, where education is a basic human right. She credits her education for earning her a seat at the table with policymakers. "Without my education, I would be one of the statistics presented to the United Nations come September," she said, referring to the upcoming United Nations Summit for the post-2015 Development Agenda. Child brides were brought up when Ms. Oke asked 17-year-old Melissa Rivimbo Cavaruno of the World Young Women's Christian Association whether she sees gender equality as progress or as an established fact. Ms. Cavaruno discussed her experience in education, where the number of female students dwindled down between primary and secondary school as more girls left to be married. Ms. Cavaruno stated that the youngest wife she knows is a 14-year-old girl from Zimbabwe. She also pointed out that gender inequality begins at an early age in every society, such as in children's toys marketed to boys or girls. Mr. Wickramaratne reminded the audience to think of gender equality not only as an issue between male and female, but also as inclusive of the reality of other genders, which garnered much applause. The most popular statement of the panel came from Ms. Cavaruno. Ms. Oke asked the panelists about their mentors, as well as the people they themselves are mentoring, to which the youngest panelist responded, "My father was the first to teach me about gender equality." This is Francesca Regalato reporting for the Global Current.
Throughout the conference, Global Current staffers spoke with delegates from around the world to get fresh perspectives on the issues raised there. Global Current correspondent Bjorn Schwarzenbach shares some of these discussions with us and what they reveal about the similarities and differences of the youth experience around the world.
After the first day of the forum, we spoke with several of the participants. Steve from Switzerland shared some of his thoughts. Here's what he had to say about his second ECOSOC Youth Forum.
I'm Steve from Switzerland. I'm 24 years old and I'm a LLM candidate in Public International Law at Leiden University. And I think that this forum is a very important opportunity for all youth, young people around the world to come. I am a little bit skeptical with the framework of the forum, and I was a bit saddened yesterday that all states were only addressing how good they were and all the developments that they thought were great, instead of telling us what issues they are struggling with and how young people can help them solving those issues. So I hope that this afternoon we will hear more about what the states need from young people and less how good their developments are.
Next, we spoke with Naomi from Papua New Guinea, who had some thoughts about how the structure of the forum could be improved.
My name is Naomi Woyengu, and I'm from Papua New Guinea. It's not in Africa, but it's in the Pacific. I represent the Young Women's Christian Association and the young people of my country. Well, in terms of my reflection from the forum, I think this forum has enabled us young people to actually gather and speak on issues that have affected us. However, one thing that I would like to be done or should have been done was that more time should be given to participants or delegate representatives from different countries to actually make comments and ask their questions, because by then we can actually have a more collective view on everyone's opinions and or answers to the questions or questions which they have. And then in terms of having an outcome document at the end of this forum, it would be more representative of everyone rather than just being of particular countries. But other than that, I love the forum. I've made lots of friends, and I think it was a real good time here.
Saya next describes to us youth policy in his home country of the Netherlands.
My name is Saya Abdullah. I'm the youth representative of the Netherlands to the United Nations General Assembly. It's my first visit at the ECOSOC Youth Forum, and we in the Netherlands think it's important to let the voice of the youth be heard. Funny quote to say, or funny anecdote, is that according to a research done in Europe, the young people in the Netherlands were one of the happiest in the world. So I think a reason for this is that in the Netherlands we think it's valuable. We regard it as very important that the voice of the youth should be heard. For example, our youth delegate program is a long campaign of 6 months, and it's a public election, so you have to work really hard to get here. So that's the message we want to send to the world, that they should also engage their youth, and a nation should see the young people as an asset and not a threat. So I hope I can share this message also with you.
And finally, Helen from the U.S. discusses with us some of the differences she noticed between her experiences as an American youth delegate with those from other regions of the world.
So my name is Helen. I'm a junior studying at George Washington University in D.C., majoring in international affairs. I don't see the diversification of jobs and opportunities as a luxury, but to some it really is, and it doesn't exist. For example, in Pakistan, I'm not saying that as the whole country they don't have this, but at least one Pakistani person feels like, maybe there could be more youth empowerment, maybe there could be more opportunities. And it's really unfortunate that this foundational level of encouragement and empowerment and opportunity and knowledge doesn't exist equally across the world. There's actually a huge disparity.
Finally this morning, Global Current Associate Producer Daniel Garay talks with Jackson Dougan, the U.S. Youth Observer at the UN, about his thoughts on the conference as the United States official delegate.
Hello, Jackson. Welcome to the show.
Hi, great to be here.
Now, what does it mean to be the U.S. Youth Observer?
First and foremost, to be the U.S. Youth Observer to the United Nations is an extreme honor to be selected out of such a large pool of applicants. The position was created to really elevate youth voices to the level of global policy dialogue. And I'm at the United Nations trying my best to represent the many voices of American youth and to try to represent that accurately and to the best of my ability. But first and foremost, it's an extreme honor to be selected and to represent such a wide range of voices at the United Nations.
And what is your role in the participation of youth and the relationship between the U.S. and the UN in general?
My role at the United Nations, and specifically interacting with youth across the United States, is to try to shorten the distance between American youth at the university level, at the high school level, at secondary level, and the United Nations itself, the work of the United Nations, to shorten that gap. So half of my time is spent in New York at United Nations headquarters and around the world, attending UN events such as Baku, Azerbaijan, and Geneva, Switzerland. And then the other half of my time is spent touring the United States and speaking to students, once again trying to shorten that gap and trying to engage students and bring to life or add a face to the discussions surrounding international relations and geopolitics and all the current event issues that we hear in the news: security crisis in Ukraine, health crisis in West Africa. So that's my duty in this position for the year that I have it.
And you were one of the many observers and delegates over at the ECOSOC Youth Forum that just happened this week. And the main topic of discussion was the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. What is your opinion on the SDGs?
So we were fortunate enough to attend the ECOSOC Youth Forum, and we were discussing, or the forum was discussing the transition from the Millennium Development Goals to the Sustainable Development Goals. And the Millennium Development Goals were devised in 2000, a set of goals to be reached or to be attained by 2015. So we've reached that mark. And now the United Nations is sitting down and discussing how or where to go in the next 15 years. And what I think, as an individual citizen with the Sustainable Development Goals, is that they have to be big and they have to be broad. Because one, we're dealing with the United Nations and we're dealing with the global citizenry. So we're not dealing with one country, one locale. And two, we're looking at 1.5 decades. We're looking at 15 years. So if we're looking at one specific thing that can be achieved in 5 years, that's not necessarily going to concur with the rest of the goals that we need to look long term, like eliminating poverty, extreme poverty, by 2030. So my opinion on the Sustainable Development Goals with those two articles in mind is that they should be broad and they should be long-term and they should be measurable. We should have metrics to be able to employ to measure whether or not we've actually succeeded in these overarching goals and these ambitious themes that were being discussed at the ECOSOC Youth Forum.
Now, in the Sustainable Development Goals, there are 17 of them that are on the table for discussion. But you, as a youth observer, which goals do you want to see the most implemented?
I think the 17 goals are an excellent framework to work with in the next 15 years. Instead of answering specific goals, I would choose contextual goals. So I think those metrics that need to be employed to eliminate poverty, or the goals surrounding poverty amelioration and elimination, have to be instituted. So those goals surrounding poverty must be instituted. Second, I think those goals surrounding climate change and the dire climate change crisis need to be instituted and need to be discussed. And third, I think those goals surrounding equal access to education and gender empowerment, because the two go hand in hand, must also be discussed and must also be employed. So those three together, I think, really, really need to be put at the forefront of the Sustainable Development Goal conversation. So poverty amelioration, climate change, and equal access to education and gender equality.
While gender equality was a big issue, what's your insights on youth empowerment, youth involvement, participation in their respective governments, and youth policy in general?
I think youth empowerment and youth involvement is a critical challenge that needs to be discussed internationally and locally at both scales of operation. I think, given that the fact that youth are 1.8 billion strong in the world, and youth being broadly defined as those between the ages of 15 and 25, with regional context taken into that. And then looking at that 1.8 billion, also understanding the fact that 73 million youth, according to the International Labor Organization, are unemployed. Taking those two figures into account, youth need to be discussed and included in the policymaking process. And I think, along with that, youth disenfranchisement and feeling disenfranchised from the political process can only spawn discontent and political unrest. And I think we're seeing the results of that disenfranchisement and political alienation and cultural alienation in various avenues worldwide. The threat of ISIS, ISIL in the Middle East. We're seeing youth uprising in Ukraine, which is a beneficial thing, depending upon your governmental leanings. So all of that wraps to one. Youth need to be included. They need to be consulted with regards to policy, and they need to be educated, and they need to have equal access to education and equal access to opportunity.
Now, in regards to the youth of the U.S., they enjoy the freest access to information. They have the rights to say basically anything they want. But while there are other youth throughout the world that don't have that right, they don't have that access to the information, but yet they're still out there fighting for what they believed in. They're out there fighting for participation. They're out there fighting for involvement. They're out there fighting for their say. And now I want to ask, do you believe that the youth of the U.S. have utilized their rights to the full potential?
That's a tenuous question, but a very good question. Whenever we see inequality, whenever we're faced with inequality, we're also faced with the choice to fight to gain equality. In the United States, we're very fortunate as youth to have equal access to information and education and various social goods when compared to other countries worldwide. Now, the gaps that we see in the United States between racial groups or ethnic minorities are also associated with individuals in those specific enclaves fighting for equal access and fighting for overall equality. Have youth in the U.S. utilized that power, that equal access? I think that sometimes we become complacent in our various entitlements to free information and free or goods and services. But I don't think we've become too complacent. There's still a high number of American youth that utilize those tools for good and utilize those tools to promote equality and to promote the work of the United Nations or to promote causes sympathetic to the work of the United Nations.
Now, in regards to youth policy, what would you have to say to someone who either lives in America or Africa or in a place of economic downturn or a place devastated by extremism? What is something you can tell them? Something along the lines of, this is policy you can follow. This is something you can do locally to truly shape the world we live in. What would be something you would say to them in regards of that?
Challenge your community leaders, challenge your political leaders. Don't be afraid to challenge. As individuals, we have that right. That's an inherent right to challenge the system. And try to get those political leaders, those community leaders, those business leaders to realize that they have the responsibility to create a space for youth, for the 1 billion voices that may not be heard worldwide. They have the responsibility to create that space. And they can only feel that responsibility when those 1.8 billion voices are telling them to do so. So as far as my advice to that very large group, that very diverse group of youth, it would be to challenge the system when you feel you are being taken advantage of, to challenge the leaders who are working the system to their advantage, to challenge the system to make space for your voice to be heard.
And then for my last question, do you think that anything that happened at the ECOSOC Youth Forum, anything the youth have said, anything that was discussed, do you think ultimately it will have any weight in the finalization of the SDGs?
I hope that what was discussed at ECOSOC Youth Forum will have a positive sway on the policymakers shaping the final Sustainable Development Goal SDG document. As far as concrete results, as far as creating a new Sustainable Development Goal of universal youth access to policymakers and positions of power for youth, I'm a little skeptical on a personal level, but I'm hopeful. And I think that that hope is what brought all of the young delegates and young policymakers to the forum, and I think that hope is what we should work with in the next 1.5 decades as we're working towards a more equitable and sustainable world.
Well, that's it for us. Thank you so much, Jackson.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
That's our show for this week. Thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed our extended coverage of the ECOSOC Youth Forum. Don't forget to check us out on the web on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. For the Global Current, this has been Bill Golba. We'll see you next week.